Hi, I'm Susan Giannantonio, and I'm here to tell you about the process of painting this floral abstract. I started out with a cradled board. It's just a 3/4 inch cradled birch plywood board, and I grabbed some sketches that I had done, just trying to make some marks, a wide a variety of marks as I could when I was doing some collaging and sketching for my collage sketchbook. And here I'm showing you that to get started with an abstract floral collage, I try to take the sharp edges off of my pages so that the edges aren't terribly apparent. They don't really stick out once I start painting. The idea of putting some of these, instead of throwing them away, these were sort of rejects from my pile of collages that I was using for my sketchbook. I save the rejects when I'm practicing mark making. I save them for this process. The whole idea is to tear up some of the marks and glue them down. I'm using gel medium here. I'm gluing them down directly, generously applying the gel medium with my palette knife. When I put lots of gel medium down, it really adheres nicely to the board. So the whole idea is to break up this surface so that when I start painting, I already have some marks down there. With acrylics, I can paint over anything I want to, save anything I want to, but initially I'm just going to glue some of these marks down. I really like an uneven surface to begin with, so this gives a little bit of texture underneath my painting. Again, I'm taking the hard edges away from these bits of acrylic mark making that I did. On other videos that I've produced, you can go back through and find, I like to paint plein air and just do mark making, making marks that are inspired by the landscape. And like I said, these are leftovers from excursions that I've done recently, trying to just get some marks down from a winter landscape actually, but that's okay. It's just a start. Just a start. Joan Fullerton would say this is the underwear part of the painting. I'm putting down some color now, acrylics. I use Nova color paints, and this is a really rich green. It's called deep green. I put a little turquoise. That's some raw sienna. And I will, let's see, that's cadmium yellow, I believe. And I'm using gesso for my whites as I build up this painting. Now I've got a reference painting, a reference photo up there in the corner, but I'm not going to really paint that exactly. I'm just going to be inspired by the colors. And this is not the only makeup brush that I'm using in this painting. About a few months ago, I took a workshop in a Texas town about a couple hours from my home, and I got there and I had forgotten to bring the bin with my brushes, so I made a mad dash for Walmart, which was the only place in town that I could find anything, and the brushes that they had there were children's watercolor brushes. They weren't going to get me very far in an acrylic workshop, so I went to the makeup aisle and I got a number of makeup brushes. They're kind of a soft synthetic brush and they really work nicely. So that brush that you see laying there is one of them. nice and soft and holds lots of paint. So it was a nice find. I'm laying in kind of a background, and I'm scraping back in. I like to scratch texture with my palette knife. It kind of gives me the feeling of the energy of the stems and whatnot. I like to feel like I'm looking through at eye level with my plants in my garden paintings. I'm laying down some quinacridone red. These are all Nova color paints, and this quinacridone, you can see, is very transparent. You can see that green on my paper that I'm using for a palette right through the red. And this is Indian yellow. It's a little bit off screen, and I apologize for that, but at least you know what it is. A little bit later in my video here, I'm going to have all of these paints in squirt bottles, which I prefer, but I had just gotten a new shipment, and at this point I hadn't gotten my squirt bottles filled up yet. I had put down a little dioxazine violet, one of my favorite paints colors, and I'm kind of rolling my brush around. What I don't want to do is a portrait of flowers. I just want to give this painting, like I said, the feeling of looking through at face to face, down at face level with the garden. I'm certainly not painting the flowers that are in the photo on the right. I'm just trying to get a feel for texture, color, reference. But once I start painting like this, I sort of just go into my own world. I don't watch the reference anymore. Now, this video is taken from a class that I taught recently, and some of my students are probably using that photo reference and painting more realistically. There's nothing wrong with that. I've just gotten to a point where I really enjoy going off on my own and just seeing where the paintbrush goes and see where the paint leads me. But everyone's comfortable with a different level of abstraction, and there's no right or wrong. It's abstract, after all, if you veer away from the photo at all. So it's up to you how far you want to abstract something. You probably noticed I love to finger paint. Once I start moving the paint around with my fingers, I really kind of enjoy that. This is a rigger brush. It's used in watercolor to make lines. And I'm about to try some stems. Now, the photo reference has a whole variety of colors in the stems, but I had to start somewhere, so I'm starting with some light stems, and I think I'll probably soon grab some dark and put it in there. To me, this calligraphy of stems is really kind of fun because it leads the eye around. For the viewer's eye just moves from element to element. My paintings tend to be kind of busy. It's just the way I paint. I don't usually have large, quiet forms. It kind of resembles the chaos of my my life. I always have lots of projects going on at the same time, and that's the way I like it. So I've got lots of things going on in my paintings usually. And I'm finger painting again. Putting a little green in there. I'm building up the painting little by little. The fun thing about acrylics is that you can build it and build it. So it got to this point, and I came back another day and decided this wasn't quite finished. Now you can see I have put my paints into bottles. This is deep green. This is cad yellow medium. I'm just going to make a few changes here to call this one finished. I'm using white paint instead of gesso today, just because that's what I picked up. Titanium white paint it's opaque to a certain extent. Oh, there's that beautiful quinacridone red that I used. And I'm continuing with pretty much the same palette as I had been. I want to stay consistent and have some color harmony. I found these web liners. Cheap Joe has these liner brushes. They're kind of like the rigger brush that I used the other day, but a little bit fatter, so I felt like these stems might be better painted with this new brush I'm trying out. Putting a little red into that green-yellow mix. If you look at stems, they often have multiple colors, and it always surprises me how much red is in the stem, particularly the stem of flowers that have red in them. Take notice sometime when you're looking at geraniums. They have quite a lot of red in their stems. Now, from here on out, this painting is being tweaked, and it's always a challenge to know whether to leave something really spontaneous and rough and loose. And what I don't want is a painting that is real rigid and stiff. Now this is smoky eye makeup brushes. It's another batch of makeup brushes, and I really like these. I would never have tried them or even thought of trying them if I hadn't forgotten my brushes at that workshop. The yellows here and there in the painting, I had been using, let's see, raw sienna, and I didn't really care for that when I came back and looked at it, so I'm going over the raw sienna a little bit and cheering up those yellows a little bit in the background. And here, this little makeup brush is just wonderful for these little buds. I wanted to put in a few more of these buds. Just for fun. That's such a pretty, pretty yellow, but I decided to go a little darker here in a minute. It pulled my eye there a little bit too stridently, if that's a word. I decided it needed to be darkened. Painting around a bud. I'm pushing some areas back with some darks. Just sort of fiddling around a little bit, but sometimes you can improve things, quiet some areas down to bring the eye intentionally to other areas. Sometimes you can make a mistake and wish that you had kept a certain part of your painting, but with acrylics you can keep on going and redo if you want to. That was something kind of nice to discover coming from a watercolor background, which is not quite as forgiving. In my next video, I intend to do some varnishing of these, a couple of these little paintings. It makes a profound difference on the surface. It really makes the colors much more rich when you varnish. This little soft brush is so nice to paint with. It's a new favorite. I decided this area was a little too busy, so I'm just doing sort of a veil. My friend Margaret used to call this type of painting putting a veil over an area to sort of tone it down a little bit, but still allowing for the a little bit of texture down through the transparent paint. Now I'm going to have some fun popping a little bit more pizzazz into these flowers. It's really fun to build up your color in acrylics. And then when you varnish, that really adds some pop. I picked up some of that quinacridone red and some white both on this brush, and I'm sort of twisting and dancing it around so that it's not really predictable exactly where it's going to lay down the white and lay down the red, but it's going to come up with a natural looking variety, I think. These kind of read like geraniums, and I am guilty of being really crazy about geraniums. I've painted them for years and I love them, so a lot of times my flowers do end up as geraniums. I decided these needed some more red. To me, I would call this a pink. I mean, the quinacridone red to me is more like quinacridone pink in my mind, but that's coming from watercolor, my watercolor experience, so I'm not going to argue with Nova Color. If they want to call this red, they can call it red. I will just use it accordingly. It's awfully pretty. I'm going back in to do some stem work here. One thing to keep in mind is that the acrylics do darken as they dry, and when I use varnish, it really does brighten them again a little bit. It's easy to make stems too spindly. It's important to put enough substance in your stems that they would actually hold up whatever flower you're working on. I tend not to hold my paintbrush down near the ferrule like this, and so here I'm putting a little more detail than the rest of this painting commanded, and therefore I'm kind of choking that ferrule, and it's not my favorite way of painting, so I'll try not to do that often. Putting some red in there. Actually, if I could go back, I would put that dark green back. I kind of like that. So as you look back through my little imaginary garden here, it feels like all of the variety of stems have created an environment that goes deep back far into the garden behind these flowers. That's what I was after. These stems give you the sense of in front of and behind, and I love that tangle. This type of painting is so relaxing and yet exciting because these marks depict movement. They create movement so that your eye is traveling through the painting. A lot of times artists through art history, if you think of John Singer Sargent for instance, his paintings looked so very free and carefree and gestural, but they were very carefully calculated and strategically painted. I think he painted pretty fast, but his brush had a lot of practice and he had a lot of confidence in his marks. So you can see how flat the paint is when it's dry. It's really lost the richness of color. So stay tuned. This is where it stands now, but I will be signing this and varnishing it in my next video.